Come on, everybody.
This is the music I used to make fun of.
Thank you.
All right, so this is Adventure Games Then and Now, and thank you guys all for being here. I would briefly like to introduce our panelists. This is Trolls Climber, our moderator. This is the lovely team couple, Corey Cole and Lori Cole.
Girls.
Al Lowe. Dave Gilbert. Our lovely, beautiful voice actress, Ivy Dupler. And Francisco Gonzalez. All right, I wanted to thank a few people, the Classic Gamers Guild. We really had a rough time over PAX because we were also doing a booth for the Coles. It's been a very interesting experience, but wonderful. And we couldn't have done it without all of our volunteers that helped us do that. So thank you guys so much. I'd also like to thank a few game devs that we have in the audience also, because they are adventure game devs. So we have Brandon Bloom here from Himalaya Studio.
Musician?
We've got from Hero U, Alia Fragio, and Sydney Hamilton. And unfortunately missing is Graham Laverty, but that's okay. Oh, is he here? Oh, we got Julia Minamata. We got Bruce Bernizzi. He's done things like Silver Lining, worked on games like Numenera. And he's currently working on Tabletop RPG. He's a gorgeous artist, one of my favorite people on the planet.
Yay!
And then we have Phil Fortier on the end. Cascade Quest. And if I know there's other game devs here, but I'm sorry, I'm really tired.
Each of you stand up and introduce yourself.
Yeah, we won't we won't need to say anything.
And then I'm Roberta Vaughn. I did, I put this together. I did put this together.
She does stuff.
And I would like to thank my mom and dad, of course.
Yeah.
And that's my brother, James Vaughn.
Yay!
Okay, I'm handing it off to Trolls.
Yep. Oh, okay, that works.
Well, thank you for the thunderous applause. Hi, I'm the Space Quest historian, and this is my panel.
Yeah.
I rule you now. Actually, I don't. No, let's keep this simple. So, welcome, illustrious gentlemen and women, to this panel. You can, yeah. So, first of all, let's get things rolling in a nice, orderly fashion with the easy questions. What is an adventure game? And I would like you to, let's just go down the line here and see what your personal definition of an adventure game is in a sentence or less.
Right.
Yeah, why don't you start, Corey?
Okay, hi. Corey. Adventure game to me is just basically, it is about storytelling, exploration, and puzzle solving. When those are the primary things in a game, that's an adventure game.
Right.
How about that?
That's not bad. That's not bad. Let's see if you can top that, Lori. Sorry, they rhyme.
Frustration. That's my definition of an adventure game. Hitting your head against a puzzle 100 times because
We call that challenge.
Yes. Your turn.
Sex and humor.
Always sells.
I've been trying to figure out what an adventure game is for the last 13 years of my career. Pretty much whatever I want it to be, whatever I personally like, narrative, just anything, any type of game that focuses more on narrative and story than action and combat.
Yeah, that's good.
That's a sensible answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say like a contained narrative within a larger world that makes you want to explore more, but you can't because it's just a contained story. But it makes you want to learn more, and that's.
It makes you want to do things, but you can't.
Yes, you cannot.
Go there.
It's a game where you go on an adventure. But no, but seriously, yeah, it's a story where hopefully the obstacles that you encounter make sense within the context of the story, and you have to overcome said obstacles to get to the end.
And would you say it would be okay to fail?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, yeah, just checking. Okay, so the panel is called Adventure Games Then and Now. So I thought we'd start with the then, and then move up to the now, and hopefully end on a sweet rainbow riding unicorns and all that shit.
Yes.
So from the early 1980s text adventures and up until we had like small teams, like 5 people could work on an adventure game and one of them just made the coffee, and up to we had, you know, the large teams, the multi-million dollars. You had tons of producers. You had to work out the design document in advance and all of that shit. And it took years and years to make a proper adventure game. Yeah, the mid-90s. Yeah. The horror years. For the esteemed veterans of this panel, could you, like, if you had to point to one particular thing you miss about ye olden days,
I'd point yellow.
1985 to 1995, is there one thing you miss, like really miss from that time?
Al, you.
Making money?
Right.
All right, that tops it.
You said one.
Well, right, okay. I meant specifically in the game development portion of it.
The early games that I did, I pretty much worked alone with an artist. It was 2, maybe 3 people. So there was no team to speak of. It was just, you know, you did this and I did this, and that was the end of it. But like even as late as '87, when I did Larry 1, Mark Crow did all the artwork, the animation, the backgrounds, the box, the everything.
Scintillating close-ups.
Everything. Scintillating close-ups, yes, in 1 month of time while he was working full-time on Space Quest. So think of that. That was how much art was in a game. It was so big it wouldn't fit on one 360K floppy.
So you miss like having one central person in charge of like the visuals and like just the small team environment?
Yeah, I'll go with that, sure.
Okay, I'm just putting words in your mouth.
People should know, you should know that I'm the outlier here in the panel, and not only in the color of shirt, because I stopped doing this 20 years ago. I haven't done a game in 20 years. Well, I kind of did a game.
But
I kind of did a game, but Josh did most of that. So,
Well, from what we hear, Josh did most of your games when you were still at Sierra.
Now, moving hastily on. Corey, since you opened your big fat mouth, why don't you...
I was just going to say, nothing is actually
if we're
changed.
going to roast Corey,
I'm an easy target. I was going to say, nothing's actually changed because Mark Crow did all his graphics for Larry 1 in a month back in '87, and Mark Crow is now doing pretty much all the graphics for Space Venture, and he's only been
Space
working
Venture,
on it
yay!
Yeah.
what is it, seven years now? So he's only been working.
We don't
for
talk about that part.
7 years, 1 month. They're kind of the same order, almost the same order.
It is coming out.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Awesome. It's the games people expect much more now, and it's just the art is harder.
Okay. Well, your
all.
turn. What's it? What did you
What's it like? Oh, what I like.
liked?
Working at Sierra was a roller coaster ride. I mean, there were some awesome moments working with amazing people, and somebody asked what was the most exciting time. For me, one of the most exciting times I had at Sierra was about 2 months into there when I was working in the SCI interpreter, and I managed to draw a little block and get it to move across the screen.
Success. That's what success looks like.
On the Atari ST.
Yeah. Right. I
was
was installing Space Quest 1 on an Atari ST emulator, and lo and behold, up comes the name Corey Cole, and I was like, holy shit.
we should get him on a panel.
I used to be a programmer. And then the other one was Castle Dr. Brain, getting to really be in charge of a design, and Lori helped. But I did more of it than usual.
I'll tell you one thing I missed about it later as we went along was that my pitch document for Larry was, I went to Ken Williams and I said, what do you want me to do next? And he said, I don't know, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't know. Soft porn sold well. What if we did a version of that had graphics? And he said, okay. That was it.
So it was like easy pitches.
That was the document.
Yeah.
It was much harder by '88. When we proposed Heroes Quest, we had a 2-page pitch. And the second page of it, Lori drew in crayon and colored pencil. And that was our characters of the game, which, just by the time we actually got to making the game several months later, were all gone. There is the centaur, the archer, and was it a giant?
There was an elf.
An elf, centaur, archer, and an elf, and what was the other one? Human?
No, there was a human.
Human, elf, centaur, and the
Oh, no.
and the gnome were the characters in Hero U that you never saw, Heroes Quest, that you
Yes.
never saw because it turned out we couldn't actually do any of that. But the first page consisted of 2 columns. One is how this is like other Sierra games and what's new here and how this is different from other games and how you can sell this game. And that was what Ken liked. He didn't care what the game was about. He cared about this will sell to my audience.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that was it.
That was like the original pitch for Space Quest 1 was just while they were sick of doing Black Cauldron, Scott and Mark just went, okay, we'll draw this little astronaut, he'll go in an elevator, he'll come down, he'll go out the other elevator. They showed that to Ken and he went, okay, that's a pitch, go make that game. Yeah. So what do you miss most from those days? The easy pitching is what I'm getting.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
the first game we did with Heroes Quest, we had everybody. We had our team. We had a smaller team than what we've got now.
It was about 6 people.
Yeah,
Although-
and we're all in one room, and we were all working together. And just like Alan and Mark, they could work. They had any problem, they got it fixed. It just was like, do it.
We were unsupervised.
Yeah, of course.
God, yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
There
there was
was
a lot
no-
of pizza going around in those days.
Yeah.
And I remember when King's Quest IV was in development, they had a new language, a new interpreter, a new compiler, everything new. And instead of being a procedural language, it became an object-oriented language. So I don't know how much more you could change than what they changed. And then they hired 2 programmers with no experience and said, you guys sit over there and do this. And then nobody ever checked them. Nobody ever asked.
nobody.
And finally, a month before it was supposed to ship, they said, well, maybe you should look at the game. And everybody went, oh, my God. That was the way it was.
So I guess I'll transfer this to the young crowd of. No,
Yeah.
sorry.
So I want to get one word in.
The stalwart carriers of the flag or whatever, and say if there's something from that era that you wish was still part of adventure game design today, is there anything that if you're developing games now or developing games back in the 90s, what would you take from the 90s and bring into current development?
The hot tub parties.
The hot tub.
Yeah, right.
I go in my bathtub sometimes after a particularly long day, and I'm just like, no, I'm kidding.
We have a slideshow coming up. No.
I'll let Dave start with this while I think of something.
I will say it was interesting that y'all talk about missing small teams, because that's how I work. And I've always had, I've never had a game with more than 4 people on the team, because the tools now can make the barrier to entry so much lower.
Yeah.
And so I have me, I do writing and programming. I have 1 full-time artist, 1 composer, and that's about it. I handle the voice acting. There's a lot more I can do myself. I handle the voice acting myself, working with this person here. And so there's a lot more you can do because the tools enable you to do that. So it's sort of, what's nice is that folks can do that again. They can work with small teams now. The tools are available for anyone, and most of them are free. And I know I prefer working now because I wouldn't want to compete with these guys back in the 90s. So, but what's interesting is that it creates a great opportunities for indies who really love those games. because they can serve that niche that isn't being served by the big companies that, just want to make money now. So like someone like me or Francisco or all the other developers here, they can make these games and sell them to an audience that still loves them.
Yeah.
And you do enough of them, I've been sustaining my family on it for a decade. So we manage. It's nice that we're able to do that now with all the tools available.
You bring up a good point about the competition, because we had no competition
Yes.
back then. Every time LucasArts would bring out a game, all of us would grab it fast and play it because we were starving for games. And so when a game would release, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
And today, it's one of 100.
Yeah, one of the misconceptions about adventure games, but I keep cutting you off, I'm sorry. The misconception was that in the 90s, adventure games were like the AAA, the big sellers, like what you would assume, but they weren't. I mean, Monkey Island 1 came out and sold, 100,000 copies or something?
That was a lot back then.
It was a lot back then, yeah, but
That
I mean,
was it.
you talk to Ron Gilbert and he says, oh, it did so poorly.
Yes, yes.
So,
It
interesting,
didn't do as poorly as Larry.
Yeah, Larry totally destroyed the Sierra.
Larry was the worst selling game in the history of the company. At a time when King's Quest was selling 50,000 copies, shipping 50,000 copies, the first day Larry shipped 4,000 copies.
but it
So
got
the
pirated
company
like
spent
no
no
That's
money
a,
on marketing, no money on sales, no money on advertising, no money on anything. They just threw it at the wall and saw what happened. And what happened was it marketed itself. I invented viral marketing, and I didn't know it because the copy protection was so bad that everybody stole a copy, so the game got widespread distribution. I just wasn't involved in any of it.
What's fascinating is that back then, if you wanted to make anything, you wanted to make and sell anything, you needed to be a shipping company as well. You
Yeah.
needed to have logistics, you had to make boxes, you needed to ship them, you needed to have arrangements with brick and mortar stores, and that alone requires like an entire team of people that you have to pay. Now, with everything being digital, we don't have to do that. So that's another thing that's nice.
My garage is a shipping company.
Yeah, I mean, also nowadays you have to have social media managers, because that's a thing, and that's a full-time job. But yeah, no, I mean, it's nice to be able, as an indie, to be able to essentially have a game production studio at your fingertips. I mean, I use my iPhone to do my video capture for, and I do basically everything myself. And, I'm in no way, shape, or form comparing the quality of my games to the old classics, but, you can make a game comparable in scope for, pretty cheap nowadays. and it's, there's still a market for it, thankfully.
Dave brought up an interesting point about working with small teams, but also working with voice actors. And of course, we got a voice actor on the panel, so we should bring that in because that also ties into the evolution of games from the small teams to the slightly larger teams and the invention of CD-ROM technology. And with CD-ROM came the multimedia stuff. You got full voice talkie CD-ROMs and such. And now we're in a position where, like, if you put out a game and it doesn't have voice acting in it, there's a certain amount of people, none of you, of course, but there's a certain amount of people who go, reading? Screw that. So voice acting has more or less become a necessity. But then again, being adventure games, being quite verbose games, because as you say, it's a story-driven medium, voice acting can also cut into your indie budget. So can you guys talk a bit about the pros and cons of having your characters come to life with voice acting, but also not having so much dialogue, not having Josh Mandel on your team, for instance, that it doesn't break the bank?
I'll just say there's zero cons. So.
Right.
It's always
The more lines, the better, obviously.
Yeah.
I work, I know I just spoke. Is it okay if I jump in?
Yeah.
Okay. Working with voice actors is my absolute favorite thing in the world to do. It is like my reward for getting the game to a specific point. But I will say that writing a game knowing that there is going to be voice acting does, I don't know what the word is, but it does change what I write. I know that there was this wonderful video taking a scene from Final Fantasy VII where Cloud meets Eris in the garden and trying to put voiceover on it and just how awful it was because it was not, it was, the scene was written for the music to drive the scene. So the music overpowers everything. And the dialogue was timed, you know, thinking that you were going to be reading it. And so they're trying to read these lines and then it would go to the next one and they'd try to slow it down and everything about it was wrong because the game was not written for voice acting in mind. And so I imagine there was a lot of growing pains when voice acting became a thing in games because you weren't quite, you didn't quite know how to do it yet. Now, whenever I write a game and write dialogue, I think this line is too long. It's going to sound, they're going to finish reading this long before they finish hearing it. Why don't I shorten this? I can get to the point a lot faster. And it's actually helped me really focus and tighten up my writing, knowing that it's going to be voice acted later.
Okay,
It's also better for the actor as well.
Do you read your lines out loud as you're
Always.
Yeah.
I mean, and from my perspective also, especially when I work with, you know, like we're talking about before about like smaller teams, that kind of thing. Having worked with both of you guys before, it's great also, like, you know, you have that in mind when you're writing it, so it's like it's going to sound good just because you're like aware of that kind of thing. But it's good from my perspective, I think, also when recording this stuff and it's just like just me and you or just me and you, where it's like, okay, I can ask you questions about like this line. It's not like some big studio or something we're walking in. It's just like, sounds so awkward, but I'm just gonna read it because that's what's written. Great. I could just literally be like, this sounds weird. I don't, like, can we rephrase and
Edit it
try
in the booth. I do it all
Yeah.
the time.
And it's just really nice for me, I guess, because, you know, it's that open communication and it's good. It's not like some scary, intimidating thing where it's like, well, we could, but like, no, because it's like so many channels of approval and like, how dare you just read what's written? It's like, no, I can have that dialogue with you about like, what sounds
Well,
good
often, like,
and
I will
stuff, so
work
it's
with
nice.
the actor. Like, half the time I work with the actor to create the character, especially if it's a character. There was this series of games I did called Blackwell, and there's 5 of them. Some people have played it, obviously. All right, thank you. Wow, all
give
right,
it
I
up
like this
for,
crowd. This is great. Well, Abe Goldfarb, the guy who plays Joey, by the 5th game, you know, he'd read a line and be like, Joey wouldn't say this. And I'd be like, all right, what do you think, how do you think he would put this? And if an actor really knows their character, they know it better than you do. I really believe that. And like I always take their advice. I mean, feel free to tweak it and say no, but I always listen to them because often like their instincts are usually spot on because they're in that zone, you're not. So I always work with the actors to inform the characters. Inform, that's the word I was looking for before. Informs, it informs the characters in every way.
I do have a question specifically for Ivy, because with adventure games in particular, there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of dialogue between characters, but usually the dialogue is all recorded separately. You come in, you do your bit, and you're not acting off anyone else. So how hard do you find it as a voice actor to make the dialogue sound natural, knowing that you don't have anyone to bounce it off of?
I think a lot of that comes from just being a fan of adventure games. Like, I got into this because I was a fan first, and then it's like, oh, that'd be fun to be in them too. So like, having played a lot of them, you get sort of a feel for like the tone and the vibe. But I think the biggest thing when doing it is to kind of remember who you are in the scene, and not just like who the character is, but like actually the role you're playing. So like I've done stuff where I am the protagonist, but also done stuff where I am like an NPC. And I feel like it's a different balance with the stuff. Like when I did a bunch of NPC type characters for Unavowed and for Lamplight City, that was fun because it's like, oh, these are like flavorful little like bursts of an interesting scene moment, like make it memorable. Not that you can like ham it up. I mean, again, it depends like who the character is, but you're definitely, especially in these types of games where it's like the protagonist is doing the interrogating or asking questions, mining information. You want the answers to be like engaging and interesting. And on the flip side, when I voiced Fira in Whispers of a Machine, that was different, especially that character too was like very like, you know, straightforward and kind of stoic about stuff. But in general, because it's like tons of questions and things like that, it's a little more level, I'd say, and also keeping in mind this is a voice you're gonna be hearing for like anywhere from like 6 to 15 hours, depending on the game, more or less. It's like, you do not want it to be grating or overly like wacky. It's like, you don't know. Just could be someone you relate to and you hear, it's like a constant presence, it's neutral. That's why when you do choose to like, be like, okay, this is a moment where a lot is happening, it's a big difference for most of the time. So I feel like a lot of that is just, you know, figuring out who you are, your role in the scene, and then the cadence will sound natural. It's not gonna be like two people trying to one-up each other, like who's the more wacky, interesting one, and then two people being like, you know, where were you the night of the murder? I was home. It's like, no, just, that's like too dull. So I think a lot of it comes from just doing this a lot and also playing it a lot, and just keeping track of what's happening.
I'm sorry, I want to
Let
turn
me
this in.
interject something. You said
Don't.
that it's recorded separately. Oh, I only did that the first game
Oh, yeah? Because
because I was stupid. We had a schedule. We hired union actors, and they had a 3-hour minimum. So you paid for 3 hours whether you used them or not.
Yeah.
And me being cheap, I said, well, why don't I schedule this guy for 2 hours to get his single lines done, and then I'll schedule an overlap with the next guy so I can get all those dialogues done. So we actually staged it, we scheduled the actors into the booth together so that we could do the dialogues.
that would explain a few things because I don't mean to step on any toes here, but the early Sierra CD-ROM games were of a varying degree of quality in terms of voice acting.
That's what I said. We learned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But your games especially, Al, usually had some of the best voice acting of the game, and you directed the voice actors yourself.
I hired, thank you, thank one of you. I was very careful hiring people. We hired Hollywood cartoon voiceover advertising actors, you know, those voiceover people. And we used voice casters. Did you do that? Did you guys use voice casters? Yeah. They, it was a company that knew all the talent. And when I'd say, well, it's going to be this guy that does this thing and he's this way and this other thing, oh, he would be good for that. And they'd bring in 5 or 6 guys and then I would listen to them and then. So the scheduling, I'm trying to say, the scheduling is important, and if you can do dialogues together, it's a lot better than.
Yeah, if you get someone else to do it, that helps.
No, I was going to say that yours must have come later than the first CD that Sierra did, because we did the voices. We had all the amateur voices for the first CD for King's Quest. Because I did the Snow Queen in that, and they were hiring people, just pulling people from the company, and we went to a hotel and did stage casting, you know, see whether the voices, and Roberta typecast me as the villainess, I think. But yes, working with voice actors is magical.
Yeah.
It is just one of those special moments. It's one of the best moments when you're doing a game, especially when you hear your characters come to life. So in Quest for Glory 5, we had wildly diverse characters, and we had the character of Wolfie, who was supposed to be, you know, he was a canine, but he was from India, and he was modeled after the Indian in Short Circuit.
Yeah.
And he spoke like that with these really weird, disjointed lines of logic. And the voice actor comes in cold because there was no time. They took the script right from there, and he nailed that voice from the first line and could read that cadence that's off, and they were never written for just dialogue. They weren't just little sentences. They were little paragraphs of how he's explaining things, and he had it. And that moment of magic. And then the guy who was doing Orestes, who had this pirate accent, I mean, I'm sure he could do that in his sleep. But when you hear those lines spoken, they become real. And it just is so amazing when that happens.
Yeah, I just wanted to add as a note, I mean, I share the sentiment too, as like the game writer hearing the voices that are, the lines performed for the first time is magical. And it also depends on the project too, because like what I like to do personally when I direct the actors, since I kind of have an idea of what the line should sound like, I'll provide the other end while they're in the
yeah,
booth.
yes.
Like the first pass through, for example, I'll play the other character that they're playing against. And if I'm recording a character that I've already recorded and I remember what they sounded like, and like I'll do my best, not like an outright like impression of them or anything, but if they had a particular cadence or something that they used in a dramatic scene or something, I'll try and replicate that to try and push it to sound as natural as possible.
I would love to stay on this topic forever, but
The voice acting panel now.
okay, let's
That's
do
what
it.
this is.
Moving on.
We don't want to move on.
Let's get into actual game design as well. I hear shouts from the audience. You'll get your time. Don't worry. Moving forward. In the early days, again, this is then and now, so I have to, in the early days, adventure games.
Early days.
Yes, and that's exactly the sort of sentiment I was looking for. You got stuck on a puzzle. You were stuck for months. There were even some talks that maybe you guys were encouraged to make your games a little more difficult than humans should normally have to endure, because then the longevity of the game. Or hint books.
I'd like to argue about that.
Okay.
Yes, please
Because
do.
I thought
it's not-
Roberta's games were too hard. I thought Jane Jensen's games were way too hard. For me. I mean, not
yeah.
for you, maybe, but I couldn't play them. I was,
Blade Runner, Sierra games?
so when I designed a game, I tried to make it easier. I wanted people to see not only the jokes at the beginning, but also the funny stuff at the end. And I tried to get it to be playable through. I failed, but
It's okay
was
to
my
fail,
goal.
Al. It's okay to
tried.
fail.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something it's only taken me 40 years or so, but I'm just starting to realize, yeah, it is okay to fail. And we keep writing things where basically, that are very, very Monkey Island kind of got us into that frame of mind where you cannot make a mistake that actually matters. There's always a way back. And I'm just now starting to think that, maybe it's okay to dead end the character. Maybe it's okay to let them fail as long as you let them know that they failed. Because we got restarts, we got replays, we got save games and stuff like that. Failing is not necessarily the end of the world. But that said, Lori and I also went out of our way to make games, puzzles that were fair and that we felt were easy and that the player could figure it out just from context within the game. And we were flabbergasted in the last few years to hear from players that said, "Oh my God, your games are so hard." I said, "We thought we made the easiest games ever."
Yeah, like now.
Yeah, well, that's the, in the current climate also, you now have walkthroughs and game facts, and you can look up Let's Players on the internet, hello, who also play and make fun of all your games. And the attention span for being stuck on a puzzle is way, way shorter than it was back. I mean, my friend Jess, who started the first ever Space Quest fan site, Roger Wilco's virtual broom closet, was famously stuck on that stupid glass shard puzzle in Space Quest 1 for 7 months.
Wow.
And and nearly blew a gasket when he figured it out. Now, he didn't have a hint book, and there was no such thing. So
There was no thing, yeah.
So you were literally, right now you can speed run Space Quest 1 in like 20 minutes if you know exactly what you're doing, but back then,
Well, don't forget to pity the poor game designers, because when we're designing a game, you think you are trying to do puzzles. Think about the poor game designers, because we are trying to come up with puzzles, and we don't want to do the same puzzles that have been done over and over and over again. We want to do something really clever. Lori and I spent 6 months working on the lockpicking.
6 months, year.
Well, at least 6 months, working the lock-picking puzzle for Hero U. And after 6 months we bought, gear puzzles and stuff that we could put together and try it. And after 6 months of that, we decided that, that if we really make this a real puzzle, it's going to take people too long to pick every lock in the game. There's too many locks. And we went back to the Quest for Glory thing of saying, what's your skill level? Is it good enough? You pass.
at least you didn't do the poke a hole through the keyhole, newspaper slide under the door kind of puzzle.
no.
Because that's been done before.
It is, but it's really cool. I mean, there's a reason
The
it's been done.
first time.
It's cool.
That is why today is so much better, because I don't have to be stuck on that frustration level. My frustration is very low for adventure games, but I want the story. I want to play the game, and that's what Ron Gilbert was such a genius when he brought out Monkey Island, because his thing is you do not want to frustrate the player. Frustration may be fun for a first few times you're trying until, and that time of day, that time of the thing, there were no hint books except a month afterwards, or worse, the 6 months after, or there's no internet. That kind of frustration we don't need in our lives. It's fun once, but nowadays you get to get to the game. You get to the end. You get to have the fun and the experience, which is what we're trying to do, is to let the player win.
Yeah, and if only LucasArts had held on to Ron Gilbert's philosophy by the time they got
Yes.
to Escape from Monkey Island,
Right.
that would have been so much better.
If they understood the thing, that whole point.
I was so disappointed. I did Larry games and people yelled at me. Reviewers chastised me for making the games too difficult, dying too often, all that stuff. So
Larry 2.
I made Larry
Good
5,
game.
and I said, yeah, nobody's going to die in this game. And I made a way for it. No death, no way you could lose. And not one reviewer mentioned it. And I was like, hell, I'll just kill him. I missed all those jokes. I used to make a joke every time you died.
Larry's the best part, was the death.
But anyway.
Space Quest? Death hunting in space? Okay, yeah, but you had some interesting. I was just going to ask, actually, the difference between being slightly sadistic toward the player versus, hand-holding them through the game. I have to bring up Larry, too, because I have a real soft spot for that game. But there's that bit on the ocean liner in the middle that I really want to ask you a lot of questions about. But I'm just going to. What was going through your mind when you were doing that bit? With the bean dip and all.
Larry 2 design was built for floppy disk drives. If you back then we had we didn't expect you to have a hard drive, and so you moved floppy disks in and out all the time. And I mean, you could have a hard drive, but a lot of players didn't.
Larry
so
was
I
very
made
small.
Larry in levels, so each level fit on one floppy disk, and you didn't have to go back. The problem I made was that I could let you leave a level without everything you needed, or in the case of the spinach dip, you could take something that would kill you. And so, yeah. It seemed like a good idea at the time.
Now, someone else told me about the spinach dip story, so why don't you tell the origin of why that spinach dip puzzle is in the game?
Yeah, this is a good one.
We had a party at our house, and a bunch of Sierra people came down, and somebody brought spinach dip in a big bread piece of, bowl of bread, and it sat out all night. Monday morning, I called in to talk to somebody, and they said, "Oh, he's out sick." "Oh, really? Okay, well, how about it?" "No, she's out sick." It was like, the more I checked, everybody who ate the spinach dip got sick because it had sat out all night and spoiled. I had eaten it Sunday for lunch, and so I knew
Lucky you.
I had time. So anyway, it became a running joke about killing people with spinach dip. So I had to put it in the game, but
So you all could experience
I wish I
that.
hadn't.
Okay, I'm going to pass this down the line to Dave.
So how about
and
errors that you
Francisco.
wish you hadn't?
The idea of frustrating the player versus giving them a lot of leeway, and in terms of, you guys want to see the player reach the end of the game.
Well, it's not even so much that. Someone, I think it was you, Lori, said, yeah, you have the internet now, you have walkthroughs now. I remember, spending months trying to defeat that wizard in King's Quest III and was happy to do it.
Oh, I hate it.
Now I'd last maybe 5 minutes before going to Google. It's not so much that our attention spans are shorter, it's just that the option is there
Yes.
when it wasn't there before. When you're 10 years old and your choices are to, call that 900 number and get in trouble, or beg your parents for a credit card so you can order the hint book, you have to be really desperate. Now that desperation's not there. You're like, oh, I'm stuck. I want to see what's next. And modern developers understand this. We know the internet exists now. And I feel that if you have to leave my game to enjoy it, then I have failed as a designer, which is why a lot of games now focus more on the exploration and the immersion and the interactivity, reactivity, things like that, giving you more things to do and put you in the experience and making it interesting and so on and so forth. And the puzzles are secondary because you only have to be stuck if you want to be. And throwing them there just to trip the player up, it's not necessary. And I personally am not good at writing them. I don't particularly enjoy them when I run into them in other people's games, so I just don't really bother with them much myself. If there is a puzzle, it is something that is very grounded in the game's world and situation the characters are in.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like, if I just think would the characters would this logically be a thing that would happen? And if the answer is no, I just get rid of it.
If I could speak also just from more of like a fan perspective, because like I have not like made a game. I've been involved in helping to make them, but not in that way. When I was a kid, like what got me into gaming was the Nancy Drew series from Her Interactive. Anyone's a fan here? Amazing games.
We share a composer.
Oh yeah. Oh my God, that made me so happy. Honestly, I was like, I know you were. Yeah, so when I was a kid, I was like 9 or so when I started playing those, and I was like not allowed to use the internet. So like I didn't even know that was like a thing. So like it's funny because you guys are saying like, oh yeah, now it's the internet. Not for me. Like, so when I was a kid, like my sister and I, we got stuck in one of the puzzles in Secret of the Scarlet Hand for like a year. I don't know. Like it was just really crazy. And then like enough time had passed that like now we're in middle school and like I'm allowed to use the internet. And I found out about walkthroughs and it blew my mind. And I like told my sister and I was like, okay. So we had this thing where you would think like instantly we'd be like, all right, look it up. Let's go. We like scrolling down so carefully, only one of us was allowed to look and then filter that into vague hints because it's like cheating. It's like, no, I still want to try to get it. I want to. So we had our own system with that where it was like, okay, we don't want it to be, straight up. And it's kind of funny. I found in the later games now with those games, they've modified their in-game hint system where, if you play in the junior mode or whatever, it's like, there's some puzzle thing and you can click, I need a hint, and it'll give you a very vague hint, like kind of how my sister and I used to do. That'll be like, have you tried talking to Bob or whatever? And it's like, I've done that. And you click like, I've done that. The next one, it's like, check out the thing on his desk. And then eventually, finally, it'll straight up be like, you need to put, the vase on the thing on his desk. It'll just tell you what to do, but only after a whole system. And
Invisiclues.
Right, and I like that.
That dates me.
Because I don't know, it's kind of what you were saying also, Dave, where it's like, I don't ever want to feel like content is locked behind puzzles where it's like, I know what I'm supposed to be doing, but I physically cannot do the slider puzzle.
Especially like at the end of a game when like it's a climax, like things are like coming to a head, you're excited, and then it's like, no, here's a puzzle, and you're stuck.
Right.
And there's like nothing more frustrating.
Or it's like I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I just don't have time for this. So it's good also, I guess, when it frustrates me less also when the puzzle feels organic to what's happening, like you're using specific like abilities or techniques or skills or something learned in the game. It's like, okay, I'm uncovering lore as I get closer to solving the thing rather than just being kind of arbitrary.
So,
Can I just chime in a little bit? Sorry, trolls.
because I love you so much,
Thank you,
you can
trolls.
talk.
I just wanted to say, I like personally as a designer, I always struggle the most with puzzle design because of that very reason. It's like you want to put in puzzles that don't halt the gameplay. You want to have puzzles that are more organic, and I generally tend to design puzzles that are more grounded in logic, or like, if you pick up a crowbar, you're going to use it to pry open a door, not to combine it with, chewing gum and make a grappling hook or whatever. So as a result, most people who play my games are like, oh, the puzzles are easy. So, it's a very fine line to walk. I've recently been thinking a lot more about puzzles as obstacles rather than puzzles, like incorporate it organically, like Ivy said. Like, for example, how many times have we seen the adventure game puzzle where you need to get into some place, but there's someone guarding the door and they make you go on a fetch quest to get something. And usually there's no real explanation for it. But, that's a perfect opportunity right there to develop the character, to develop the world, to do something that makes sense or reveals a little bit more of the story. So yeah, and I went one step further in my last game, Lamplight City, which is a detective game. I just didn't have an inventory. Thank you, trolls. I didn't have an inventory because I was like, this is a detective game. The focus is investigating crimes. I'm not going to be combining sticks and string to make fishing rods. I'm just going to call someone, like if there's something in a drain, I'll call somebody to open the drain, and you know, because I want to solve the mystery. So yeah, it's tricky. I still don't know.
I can tell you exactly how you make a puzzle. A puzzle is you're looking at a plumber, and he's got a bunch of pipes. And he's got to go around a corner. So the joints in the pipes, those are the puzzles. Your story is the pipes, and you got to get around that corner. So you find that this is a place where it makes sense that the adventurer, the hero, is in a position where he can solve a problem for someone. And so he is the joint in the pipe that allows it to get around the corner. So when you find those places where you have a natural break in the story, you have a natural thing that a bystander can come into the story and help someone with, that's what you put the puzzle in. And it's not really a puzzle, it's just a story event that is where the player is in charge.
Could I say one more thing?
Right.
You just reminded me of something. It's always good to try to incorporate like gameplay mechanics into puzzles. I know but it's also important to listen to feedback if the puzzles suck. But it's also important to parse the feedback in the right way to make sure that the feedback you're getting is actually what they want. In the first few Blackwell games, there was a notebook mechanic. I thought, okay, she's a detective type character. The inventory is clues. This was used in Discworld Noir, and I totally stole it, where you have like just one clue and another clue. You combine them, and then you get a third clue. Like you make a connection between them. And I thought this was very clever for a detective game, but what ended up happening was that a lot of players got frustrated with it. And by the second game, there were so many complaints about it. All the reviews, they all didn't like it. So then the third game, I got rid of it completely. And so naturally, all the response was, where's the notebook clue combining mechanic? We loved that thing. And I'm just like, wait, what? So like this could have driven me crazy, but what I did was I went back and I looked back at all the original feedback. And it wasn't so much that they didn't like the notebook interface, they didn't like how it was being used. Because if they see, you know, person hates puppies, dead puppy, they've already made that connection in their head, so they don't really think to take that step of telling the game to make that connection as well. So for a lot of the time, it seemed like work they had already done. And when I was reading the feedback, I didn't quite understand that until later. And so for the fourth game in the series, I deliberately created clues that you couldn't combine them in your head. Like if you have a set of initials and a list of names, you're not gonna go through all those names yourself. You have to combine them, that kind of thing. So you have to listen to the feedback properly. Otherwise, you stand the chance of just screwing it up completely.
All right, I had a whole bit about how to also give games more longevity in this era where idiots on YouTube play your games and spoil the story for everyone, alternate puzzles and solutions and such, but we also have to have time for audience questions. Hi, audience. So I'm just gonna sprint for the exit like a badly designed adventure game, and talk about where you guys see the future of adventure games, because there will be people, perhaps even in this auditorium, perhaps even out there in Twitch land, who will say that the point-and-click adventure game genre reached perfection sometime in 1993, and there's really nothing we can do except refine it. But there are also a lot of new interesting technologies coming out. My mate Alexander did a VR game where you physically talk to the onboard computer and it responds with voice recognition technology. And we've got stuff like VR and all of that stuff. So I just want to hear, this is a raise your hand kind of question. Hi, Dave.
Hi.
I see you.
I have opinions on this.
With what we've learned from the past in the 90s, point-and-click technology, or perhaps even earlier with that, text parsers and all that stuff, and with the emergence of new and interesting and exciting technologies like VR, is there anything that you would like to see go forward, or is there something you'd like to see, or just take a sharp detour around that one and keep going?
I mean, the one thing that I always find interesting when folks ask me about, you know, where do you see adventure games, or what do you think makes a good adventure game, or how do you sell or market an adventure game, blah, blah, blah. The one thing that I tend to be wary of is lumping all adventure games together. They are, it's not like it's its own separate, unique, special thing. they're stories. It's like saying, oh, what's the future of movies? What's the future of books? What's the future of television? It's just a medium of telling stories, and we're already seeing, narrative. I always just say narrative type games going in just insanely different directions right now, and that's kind of what I like to see. Is just there's no right way to make an adventure game. There's no right or wrong way to sell or market one, whatever. They're just all games at the end of the day. So it's like, oh, how would you feel about FMV in an adventure game? Like, great. If it's fun, awesome.
Yeah.
If it sucks, then it sucks. Like, it's not up to me to say this is fun and this isn't. So yeah, I don't really have any opinion, despite talking a lot, on the future of adventure games. Just that I just think it's dangerous to just lump them all together like it's its own special thing.
Al came in first.
In 1982, before most of you were born,
I was.
probably,
I was 2 years old, but that still
I
counts,
went
right?
to a demonstration of a guy with an Apple II computer connected to 2 Laserdisc players. Honest. I mean, and when I saw it, for some reason, the demonstration that he did worked fine and it was okay, but it triggered a thing in my brain that said, I think someday, and my goal always was this, to have myself be the star of a movie. I wanted to be, I wanted my image to be in the game. I wanted to see myself walking around on the screen. I wanted to be able to do all sorts of things. But there was a story there. There was narrative. There were other characters. There was character development. But that was what I went for. And we haven't got there yet. But I would like to see people be the protagonists of their games. And I tried it once with what the last game I did a scan. You could load a scan of a picture into the game and put your face in my game, and you could load a sound file, a wave file, and put your voice in the game. But it was so primitive. I just did it because I thought if I don't do it, I'll never do it. And the way it worked out, I never did it. So that's anyway. That was my vision, was to see myself as star of a movie.
Corey.
I was going to say that once upon a time, maybe even still, I used to read books. These things,
What are those?
paper, Kindle, or whatever, and they tell stories. And there's more than one book. There's more than 100 books. There's more than 100,000 books. Okay, so the future adventure games is unlimited because, we keep telling, even if we say we're telling the same story over and over, we aren't. So every fantasy adventure game is its own unique thing, every science fiction one, and just like, movies have such high budgets, they don't make as many movies as they do books. But, adventure games are about telling stories, and there's a lot of stories to be told. And, what makes them into games instead of just a story is, as Al says, customization, having choices and having your character have agency. And if you can put yourself in it, that's awesome. But even if you can't, there's so many stories to be told that there will always be more. Yeah.
Right. Ivy.
Something like I'm personally excited about is how stuff like Google Home and Alexa and things like that can help with voice games where that's like the primary interface.
Says the voice actor.
Yeah, personally I'm excited about that. I did a cool game that came out, I think, like later last year or early this year, called The Vortex by Doppio Games. That is this really cool thing that you can do on like Google Home and Alexa, where it's just a voice-activated adventure game, and it's really neat. So it's a lot of stuff that, honestly, in some ways, is kind of full circle because it is very much like walk forward, or it's like kind of like the text input stuff, but just like there is an optional screen that if you have like the Google Home screen thing, like it can do stuff with that. But it's designed to be played primarily with voice, and it's interesting too because it utilizes for the main communication, you're like on a spaceship. So it's like the Google Home or Alexa voice is the one that is talking to you, almost like GLaDOS and Portal kind of thing. But my role in it is like you're on this spaceship and you uncover these audio logs, and it's like, what happened to the crew? I'm like the captain of the ship, and spoiler, didn't end so well, so because it's abandoned. So it's like you uncover all the audio logs and it pieces together like the narrative and the story. It's like little radio plays almost. And I found it really interesting because it's like, sounds like really nice high production value and stuff and really great writing. Someone involved with like No Man's Sky wrote it and stuff. It's like, it's really good. I thought that was just a cool thing. So I'm
And what
excited.
you really want is Alexa creeping you the fuck out in your
Yes.
own home.
Yes, yes. So I'm excited to see like more things like that, kind of like radio play, audio adventure
Yeah.
type stuff. It's a cool
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Saint Noir is a new game. Nolan Bushnell is promoting, who created Atari and Chuck E. Cheese. There's a game called Saint Noir that's all Alexa based, and you do your ask questions of people, by voice and so on, and then instead of the automated Alexa voice, it is all professional voice actors responding, and they're walking around having conversations. So you get to listen in on these and interact with them and try to find out what's going on, and especially as thousands of branches.
Francisco, where do you see the future of adventure gaming? Is the point and click the definitive type, or is there something cool around the corner that we should be looking forward to?
I actually really don't know. I mean, I think that narrative games are never going to go away. We're always going to have adventure games in the sense that you're always going to have story-based games. I mean, the point-and-click formula is basically sort of still being refined, I guess. I mean, there's different versions of it as well. Yeah, I don't know. I'll be cynical and I'll say that I predict that the future of adventure games will be that in about a month or from a month to a year, someone will write a clickbait article saying adventure games are dead. And then everyone will get up in arms and we all know it's not true. And
Basically
then
the
that whole
preface to
cycle
every
will begin
review of any
again.
of my
Starts
games.
again.
Yeah. So.
They're not dead, everyone. Journalists, anyone? Stop it. We've heard it.
Well, basically, we're all waiting for the holodeck. I mean,
yeah, okay.
we
Oh,
all
right,
want to play in the holodeck. We want to do, I was just talking to somebody today, how about a VR Tron? I mean, go into that Tron world, and this is where we are, first person, we are the character.
Yeah.
So that's really the way we're going to eventually get to go.
Yeah, but I'd have to get up off the sofa.
Well,
Yeah, I actually was messing around with the VR set recently, and I played the new Blade Runner movie. Put out like a little interactive experience where you were in the world of Blade Runner, and you got to do like a little investigation thing, and it was really cool. And I was like, I'd love to see a full game like this. So yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Last word from Corey?
Well, actually, it's a shame we didn't have time to take any questions from the audience, but
Yeah, well, I was actually going to say, if we have like some quick questions from the audience, there are microphones on either side of the aisle. If you can form an orderly queue, no shoving, no shooting.
the only thing in the way of VR games right now is not enough installed base, and basically there's no money in it.
and VR, actually.
Excellent.
The
A
VR
queue of
thing.
two
And the
people.
technology's bad. Two-person queue, cool. Ask
yeah.
a question.
Oh, there's three. There's,
Oh, three, okay.
Oh, yeah, three?
Yeah,
Anything
we have
before?
to, okay.
Dave, sit down. No,
1
I'm
minute
just
each.
kidding.
Yeah, 1 minute each.
Yeah.
Go?
Go ahead.
Okay. Hi. So I think that one of the best parts of adventure games are like the little jokes and Easter eggs in them. Thank you. The remake of Quest for Glory, the VGA one, there's the part where you're walking through the forest and you all of a sudden you hide behind a tree and Earl from Dinosaurs comes through. So is there like any Easter egg or joke in any of your games that is really your favorite?
Al, can you answer that? 'Cause you've had a few. Or the best joke ever?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, Al.
Al Eufratio in the
What is
audience.
it?
What? Wow. Yes.
I like the Persian golfer just because the combination of the images that went with that were, in 2 words, it told a story.
All right, on this aisle.
Sure. First of all, thank you for the games. So, complement to the previous question, thinking about all the games that you've shelved over the years because you couldn't make them for some reason, is there any specific technology that you could wish into existence, short of the holodeck, that would let you pull those back off the shelf?
Make game button.
I want the company management that will take chances.
Yeah.
Because every game that got shelved is because they wanted a sequel or some, do it again because it sold well last time. So the game management can take chances. That's the button we need. That's technology.
All right, over to this aisle.
All right, Al, you touched on something that's very dear to me, I play adventure games.
Where did you?
There's no
Oh,
harassment
sorry,
here.
sorry. Not in that way.
Show us on the doll where you touched.
There was full consent. I play adventure games because I want to be a hero. And I want to see myself in that role and play through that story as the hero. And if you look out at this crowd, probably everybody has that same experience, but we're all so very different. How do you handle diversity in your games? How do you make it so that everybody feels comfortable in that hero role? Anybody?
Badly.
Yeah, badly. We're a bunch of, white game designers.
We are trying very hard. I did not realize, when we started to make Hero U, diversity, I didn't even understand what diversity meant. You hear it as a word, and we'll have as many diverse characters. I didn't understand the impact and importance that it has, and how important it really is. We've always tried to have a diverse game. We set the game in Africa at one point, and our character is this white bread guy. Well, no, he is never white bread because he is you. You were put into Africa and you had no context for what the world is like. And the point of Quest for Glory 3 was you are suddenly there. And how do you handle this situation? How do you learn about their culture and how they deal with things? So that was my whole point in writing that game, was to say, you have to adapt to them. You have to learn about them and become one of them, so that there is no us in them.
So it's stealth diversity and stealth education. It should be intrinsic to the game, and you should just be there.
And to have as many different
Don't push it.
characters. In the one we're doing now, we have somebody from Africa. We're going to have a woman that's in a wheelchair. The woman in the wheelchair will not suddenly magically get poofed with a fairy wand and begin to walk. She will be able to be her own person. She may be in a wheelchair, but that isn't it. So
I handle diversity by insulting every person equally. I was rude to everybody, I guess.
Diversity is something that I've always, it's something I've been interested in more and more. Because when I write the games, I always used to say the hated thing, and I really regret saying this, is like, oh, I don't think about politics. And that's not necessarily true, because when I say I tend to have a very diverse cast in my game is because they usually take place, most of my games take place in New York City, and it's my experience of New York City, and it's a very diverse population in New York City. So it's not so much that I wasn't political, it's just that my own internal, thoughts and feelings on diversity just happen to come out. So like if I have an idea for a character, he's probably based on someone I saw like in the deli or at the library or whatever, and they will more than likely, not be white because I'm in New York. So that's just sort of just how it happened very organically. And I can't see the sign because I'm blind. Did that say time's up?
Yes.
Time. Okay.
All right, so right at the end here, thank you so much for coming. I want to give a special shout out to the peeps at Giggle Horse Games for flying me out for this, and a huge big shout out to Kevin Wallace for the Iron Brew. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for coming.